4 biblical prophecies about Iran. 4 specific predictions written thousands of years ago by 2 different prophets, Jeremiah and Ezekiel, in 2 different books of the Bible, addressing 2 different dimensions of Iran's prophetic future. Prophecy number 1. The breaking of Elam's bow. Iran's prominence in biblical prophecy is not random. It's not a coincidence of geography. Persia was Israel's deliverer, its liberator, its protector. And then, in 1979, with the Islamic Revolution, everything reversed. The nation that once freed Israel became the nation most committed to destroying it. The deliverer became the enemy. And the prophets, writing 2,600 years before that reversal occurred, described both roles. They described the deliverance, and they described the judgment. Turn to Jeremiah chapter 49, verse 35. Because what this verse says, written roughly 2,600 years ago by a prophet who had never heard of ballistic missiles, drone warfare, or nuclear enrichment, reads like it was torn from this week's headlines. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Behold, I will break the bow of Elam, the chief of their might. Now let me unpack this. Elam is an ancient region in what is now southwestern Iran, specifically the area around modern-day Khuzestan province. This is not a different country from Persia. It is a different region within what we now call Iran. And the fact that Jeremiah prophesies against Elam specifically, while Ezekiel prophesies about Persia more broadly, tells us that God has more than one prophetic word concerning this nation. Multiple prophecies, multiple dimensions, multiple timelines. The bow of Elam was its primary weapon. In the ancient world, Elamite archers were legendary, feared across the entire region for their skill, their range, and their devastating effectiveness in battle. The bow was not a secondary weapon for Elam. It was the chief of their might, the defining military capability that made Elam a power to be reckoned with. And God says He will break it. Now think about what the bow represents in modern terms. What is the chief of Iran's might today? What is the primary military capability that makes Iran a regional power, that allows it to project force, that makes its enemies calculate before acting? Its ballistic missile program, its drone capability, its air defense systems, its nuclear infrastructure. These are the modern equivalents of Elam's ancient bow, the weapons that define Iran's military identity and give it the ability to threaten nations thousands of miles away. And as of March 2026, those capabilities are being systematically destroyed. Operation Epic Fury has struck ballistic missile production facilities, storage sites, and mobile launchers. B-2 stealth bombers have dropped bunker-buster munitions on deeply buried underground sites. Iran's air defense network has been suppressed. Its navy has been functionally eliminated. Over 30 vessels sunk or disabled. Its ballistic missile launch capability has been reduced by an estimated 86%. Now I need to be careful here. And this is where responsible teaching separates itself from sensationalism. What we are seeing may be the beginning of what Jeremiah described, but the prophecy describes something more comprehensive than a military campaign conducted by human armies. I will break the bow. The subject is God, not the United States, not Israel, God. The prophecy describes a divine action, a breaking so total, so decisive, so unmistakably from the hand of God, that it cannot be attributed to human strategy alone. And that means what we're watching right now may be stage setting rather than fulfillment. The military strikes are real. The degradation of Iran's capabilities is measurable. But the prophecy implies a breaking that is irrevocable, a destruction of Iran's military power that is so complete, so permanent, and so clearly supernatural in its scope that the entire world recognizes it as divine judgment, not just military defeat. What's left to happen? A decisive, unmistakable collapse. Not just degradation, but elimination of Iran's ability to project military force. A collapse so dramatic that it cannot be explained by airstrikes alone. A breaking that leads directly into the next three elements of Jeremiah's prophecy. And that brings us to the second prophecy, because Jeremiah doesn't just describe the breaking of the bow. Prophecy number 2, the scattering of Elam. Jeremiah 49:36. And upon Elam will I bring the four winds from the four quarters of heaven, and will scatter them toward all those winds. And there shall be no nation whither the outcasts of Elam shall not come. Four winds, four quarters of heaven, scattered to every nation on earth. This is not a localized displacement. This is not a temporary refugee crisis. This is a global diaspora, a scattering so complete that the outcasts of Elam appear in every nation under heaven. Now here's what makes this prophecy so striking in light of modern history. Because the scattering of Iran's people has already begun. It began in 1979, when the Islamic Revolution overthrew the Shah and installed Ayatollah Khomeini's theocratic regime. Millions of Iranians fled the country. They fled to the United States, to Canada, to Europe, to Australia, to every continent on earth. The Iranian diaspora today numbers in the millions, with significant communities in Los Angeles, London, Toronto, Sydney, Berlin, Dubai, and dozens of other cities worldwide. Iranian professionals, academics, artists, entrepreneurs, and families have been scattered across the globe for over 4 decades. And that scattering has accelerated in waves after the 1979 revolution, during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, after the 2009 Green Movement protests, after the 2019 and 2022 protest crackdowns, and now again in 2026, as the regime faces its most existential crisis in history. The power vacuum left by Khamenei's death, the ongoing military strikes, the economic collapse, the internal chaos, all of these are creating conditions that could produce the largest wave of Iranian displacement yet. Jeremiah said the outcasts of Elam would appear in every nation. Today, the Iranian diaspora is one of the largest and most geographically dispersed in the world. The scattering is not hypothetical. It is documented, measurable, and ongoing. And there's one more dimension to this scattering that most prophecy teachers mention, but few develop. And it connects to something happening right now that should bring tears to your eyes rather than fear to your heart. But I'm going to save that for the next prophecy. Because what God does after the scattering is the detail that changes everything. Now, let me ground this in the present reality. Because the conditions that could produce a dramatic acceleration of Iranian displacement are not theoretical. They exist right now. Iran's economy was already in crisis before Operation Epic Fury began. Inflation was running at record levels. Unemployment was devastating the younger generation. The same generation that took to the streets in 2022 chanting, "Woman, life, freedom." And the rial had lost most of its value against the dollar. Basic goods were becoming unaffordable for millions. Now add to that existing crisis the impact of a major military campaign, infrastructure damaged or destroyed, oil exports disrupted, sanctions tightened, internal power struggles consuming whatever remains of the government's capacity to function, and a population that has been told for decades that the regime would protect them from exactly this kind of attack. now watching their military humiliated and their country bombarded by the world's most powerful military alliance. The pressure on ordinary Iranian citizens, the millions who had nothing to do with the regime's policies, who simply want to feed their families and live in peace, is immense and growing. And when that kind of pressure reaches a tipping point, people move. They flee. They scatter. They go wherever they can find safety, opportunity, and survival. Jeremiah described it as the four winds, pressure from every direction, driving the people of Elam to every corner of the earth. And the conditions creating those four winds are converging right now. Military pressure from above, economic collapse from within, political chaos from the leadership vacuum, and social desperation from a population that has been pushed beyond its breaking point. The prophecy suggests a scattering so wide that Elam's people would appear in nations across the earth. Prophecy number 3. God setting his throne in Elam. Now, this is the prophecy that carries the most weight, because it doesn't just describe military defeat or population displacement. It describes something far more personal, far more specific, and far more devastating for the ruling power. Jeremiah 49:38. And I will set my throne in Elam, and will destroy from thence the king and the princes, saith the Lord. Two actions in one verse. First, God sets his throne in Elam. Second, God destroys the king and the princes. And both actions are attributed directly to God, not to a foreign military, not to a coalition of nations, to God himself. Now let me take these one at a time, because each one has a modern dimension that is impossible to ignore. I will destroy from thence the king and the princes. The king, the supreme authority, the ruler who sits at the top of the political, military, and religious hierarchy. In modern Iran, that was Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader since 1989, the man whose word was final on every matter of state, the man who held more power than any elected official, military commander, or religious authority in the country. And as of February 28, 2026, Khamenei is dead. Over 40 senior commanders, IRGC leaders, government officials, the princes, have also been killed. Jeremiah wrote those words roughly 2,600 years ago, and the king and the princes of Elam have been destroyed in the opening days of a military campaign that the regime never believed would come at this scale. Now I need to be honest about the limits of this parallel. The verse says, I will destroy. God as the agent, not a human military. And the destruction described may imply something more comprehensive than what has occurred so far. A total removal of the ruling class, not just the top layer. A new hardline successor could emerge. The Revolutionary Guard could reconstitute under different leadership. The regime could survive in some diminished form. For the prophecy to be fully fulfilled, the destruction of the king and the princes would need to be permanent and irreversible, not a temporary decapitation that the system recovers from. But here's the second half of the verse, and this is the part that should shift your attention from fear to hope. I will set my throne in Elam, God's throne, in Elam, in Iran. Now what does that mean? Some interpreters read this as a reference to divine judgment, God establishing his authority over the land by executing judgment on its rulers. And that is a valid reading. But many scholars and many Iranian Christians see something more in this phrase. They see a reference to spiritual transformation, to God establishing his presence, his throne, not through military force, but through the advance of the gospel in the very land where the regime tried to stamp it out. And here's what makes that interpretation so powerful. Iran today has one of the fastest-growing Christian communities in the world. And I don't mean that as a vague, feel-good statistic. I mean it as a documented, researched, confirmed reality that is stunning in its scope. Despite decades of persecution, the banning of Bibles in Farsi, the surveillance of house churches, and the threat of death for apostasy from Islam, the underground church in Iran has exploded. Estimates vary, but credible reports suggest that hundreds of thousands and possibly over 1 million Iranians have come to faith in Jesus Christ in recent years. Some estimates from organizations tracking persecuted Christians place the number even higher. And the mechanism of conversion is extraordinary. Iranian believers consistently report that they came to faith not through traditional evangelism, but through dreams and visions. Encounters with Jesus that they did not seek and cannot explain. A figure in white appearing in their sleep and saying, "Follow me." This phenomenon has been reported so widely and so consistently across the Iranian diaspora and inside Iran itself that it has become one of the defining characteristics of the Iranian church. A church born not from human missionary effort, but from direct, supernatural, divine encounter. I will set my throne in Elam. Could this be what Jeremiah was describing? Not a political throne, not a military occupation, a spiritual throne, the presence of God, through the Holy Spirit, through the gospel, through the miraculous conversion of souls, establishing itself in the very land where the rulers tried to keep him out. The king and the princes are being destroyed, and the throne of God is being established, not through force, but through faith, not through bombs, but through dreams, not through regime change imposed from Washington, but through heart change initiated from heaven. Sometimes judgment and revival unfold at the same time. And what we may be witnessing in Iran is exactly that. The breaking of a regime that persecuted God's people, and the simultaneous advance of God's kingdom among the very people that regime oppressed. Now, before I move to the fourth prophecy, I need to show you how Jeremiah ends this oracle, because the final verse of Jeremiah's prophecy against Elam is not a curse, it's a promise. Jeremiah 49:39. But it shall come to pass in the latter days that I will bring again the captivity of Elam, saith the Lord. Restoration in the latter days. After the bow is broken, after the scattering, after the king and the princes are destroyed, after the throne of God is established, God promises to restore Elam. That verse should bring tears to your eyes, because the God of the Bible is not a God who destroys without purpose. He is not a God who judges without mercy. He is a God who breaks in order to rebuild, who scatters in order to gather, who removes rulers in order to establish his own reign, and who promises, in his own words, in his own text, in his own covenant language, that the story of Elam does not end in judgment. It ends in restoration. And the timing is explicit. In the latter days, the end of the age, the final period of human history, the same time frame in which Ezekiel 38 unfolds, the same time frame in which the birth pains of Matthew 24 intensify, the same time frame that many believers look at the current world and believe we are living in right now. The breaking of the bow, the scattering of the people, the destruction of the rulers, and then restoration. That is the arc of Jeremiah's prophecy against Elam. That is Jeremiah's prophecy. 3 dimensions of Iran's future covering military power, population displacement, and leadership upheaval, all ending in a promise of restoration. But Jeremiah is not the only prophet who addresses Iran's role in the last days, because Ezekiel adds a fourth dimension, one that shifts the focus from Iran's internal crisis to Iran's external alliances. And what Ezekiel describes is the prophecy that connects Iran not just to its own future, but to the final conflict of human history. Verse 5. Because in the middle of the most detailed geopolitical prophecy in the entire Old Testament, a prophecy that describes a specific coalition of nations invading Israel in the latter days, Ezekiel names a nation that you now know very well: Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Persia, listed among the coalition nations, named explicitly, as part of an alliance that marches against a regathered Israel in the end of the age. Now this is the prophecy that shifts the entire conversation from Iran's internal crisis to Iran's external role. Because Jeremiah addresses what happens to Iran, Ezekiel addresses what Iran does, and what Ezekiel says Iran does is join a coalition, a specific, identifiable, latter-days alliance led by a power from the far north, and march against the nation of Israel. Ezekiel 38, 1-6. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and I will turn thee back, and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet, Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarma of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. The coalition is led by Gog, from the land of Magog, widely associated with Russia, or a northern Eurasian power. It includes Meshech and Tubal, ancient Anatolian regions in modern Turkey, Persia, Iran, Kush, Sudan, and the Horn of Africa, Put, Libya, and North Africa. Gomer and Togarma also linked to Turkey and surrounding regions. Mapped onto the modern world, this is an alliance of Russia, Iran, Turkey, and North African nations, all marching against Israel. And every one of those alliance relationships exists in the real world right now. Russia and Iran have a deepening military partnership. Turkey has been drifting from NATO toward closer ties with Russia. Iran funds proxy forces on every Israeli border. The framework of the coalition Ezekiel described is already operational. The prophecy doesn't describe a single enemy. It describes an alliance, and the architecture of that alliance is being built in plain sight. Now, let me show you why the current geopolitical landscape has prophecy watchers paying such intense attention. Because the alliance patterns between the Ezekiel 38 nations are not hypothetical. They are documented, deepening, and accelerating. Russia and Iran have conducted joint military operations in Syria. Russia has sold Iran advanced weapons systems, including air defense technology and fighter aircraft components. Russia provides diplomatic cover for Iran at the United Nations Security Council. And in the wake of Operation Epic Fury, Russia's calculations about Iran's survival and future alignment become even more consequential. Because a weakened Iran becomes a more dependent ally, not a less dependent one. Nations in crisis lean into their strongest partnerships, and Iran's strongest partner is Moscow. Turkey, while still a NATO member, has been on a trajectory of divergence from Western alliance structures for over a decade. It purchased the Russian S-400 missile defense system in defiance of NATO. It has strengthened economic and energy ties with Russia. It has intervened in Syria, Libya, and the Caucasus, often at odds with Western interests. And its relationship with Israel has deteriorated significantly under President Erdogan, who has been one of the most vocal critics of Israeli policy in the Muslim world. These are not future possibilities. These are current realities. The coalition Ezekiel described, Russia, Iran, Turkey, and their aligned partners, exists in embryonic form right now. The alliances are built. The hostility toward Israel is shared. The only question is whether these relationships will mature into the full military coalition Ezekiel described. And I want to be clear, these are possible precursors, not confirmation of the prophecy. The coalition has not formed in its full military configuration. The invasion has not occurred. The supernatural intervention described in Ezekiel 38 and 39 has not taken place. We are watching alignment, not fulfillment. But the alignment is closer today than it has been at any previous point in history. Now, let me show you the mechanism by which this coalition is drawn into conflict. Because Ezekiel doesn't say the nations choose to invade Israel on their own initiative alone. He says God draws them out. Ezekiel 38:4. And I will turn thee back, and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. Hooks in the jaws. God places an irresistible pull on these nations, using their own hostility, their own ambitions, their own alliances as the mechanism, but controlling the timing and the trajectory. The coalition doesn't stumble into the invasion. They are drawn, sovereignly, purposefully, by a God who uses human choices to accomplish divine purposes. And here's the question that connects this directly to the current conflict. Could the military pressure on Iran right now be part of what creates the hooks? If Iran survives this war, weakened, humiliated, radicalized, could the desire for revenge, the need for powerful allies, and the desperation of a fractured regime drive it deeper into exactly the kind of coalition Ezekiel described? Could the very war that was meant to neutralize Iran be the hook that ultimately pulls it toward the prophetic confrontation? The prophecy suggests that even powerful nations can be drawn into events they cannot control. And the dynamic of escalation, alliance deepening, and strategic desperation that follows military defeat is exactly the kind of mechanism the hooks metaphor describes. Now step back and ask the question that sits underneath this entire prophecy. Why Israel? Of all the nations on earth, why is this the one that draws a coalition from Russia, Iran, Turkey, and North Africa to march against it? The answer has never been political. It has never been strategic. It is spiritual. Jerusalem is the city where God chose to place His name. Israel is the nation through whom God chose to reveal Himself to the world. The Jewish people are the people through whom the Messiah came. And the conflict over Israel, the hostility directed at it, the alliances formed against it, the obsessive international attention focused on it, is ultimately a spiritual conflict over God's covenant promises and God's redemptive plan. The Antichrist targets Israel because the Messiah comes from Israel. The coalition marches against Israel because God's purposes flow through Israel. And the reason Iran, Russia, Turkey, and their allies are drawn into this confrontation is not geopolitics. It's theology. It's the cosmic battle between the kingdom of God and the kingdom of darkness, played out on a physical map with real nations, real armies, and real consequences.
Many seem to be confused because they do not understand the book of Revelation. However, what if there was an animation showing the entire book?